So, let's talk a little bit about flood insurance. There was a lot of damage due to wind, but a lot of the questions that are coming in are around the topic of flood insurance. So, um, let's start with something that may seem obvious, but when you are in a flood zone, your lender is going to require you to get flood insurance, homeowners, hurricane, and flood insurance. Now, a question that came up recently is the banks and lenders only require a $250,000 flood policy. Now, these days, what does $250,000 do? It's not going to rebuild your home. It's not going to gut it out and rebuild your kitchens and rooms. But something that many homeowners don't realize that you can get what's called excess flood. So although the loan only requires $250,000, call our office because we do have programs that can give you what's called excess flood. So for an example, if your house to rebuild is $750,000, but you notice that your lender only required you to get the FEMA maximum of $250,000, call us up because we can get you more coverage than what's required by your lender. That's number one. Number two.
This, Bradley, with the extra rider, typically how much more is it to get that extra coverage of maybe the extra $500,000?
The excess flooding.
Yeah, so the extra $500 or $1 million in coverage would always depend on how high you sit above the base flood elevation. So just like your flood insurance, we would need an elevation certificate or actually plug it in to the system because it's not just a flat charge. It's going to depend on where your property is located and how high above base flood elevation your property sits. So I would love to just give you guys a number, but it would always depend. But like Attilio always says, when in doubt, just call the office. We can give you complimentary quotes on your property.
All right, I'm going to tell you guys to the penny how much it's going to cost. More.
But like what I'm getting at, is it like a lot more, or is it just like, oh, this is like a rider to the policy?
I don't think it's a lot more, but I'm sure, well, how much is a lot more worth if your freaking house is flooded?
Yes.
There ain't no house on Oahu you lucky if you get ADU can be built for $250,000.
That's true.
Absolutely correct.
So I will get the extra insurance.
Yeah, and it's, when I do send out these quotes, it's actually not more. It's not a rider. It's going to be a separate policy. So it's going to be a separate excess flood policy that's not underwritten by FEMA. So it will be a separate policy. So it's not a rider. And a lot of times when we do send the quotes, they're like, it's not that much more. Why didn't I get this earlier? So, if when in doubt, just call the office and see how much it would cost. Number two is a lot of people that got flooded wasn't necessarily in a flood zone as well. So if you don't sit in a flood zone, your loan doesn't require it. It doesn't hurt to get a quote to see, I live in Pololo, I live on a hillside. It probably won't get flooded, but after we saw the rains on the second Kona 2 storm, on the Kona storm, there was a ton of water that came down in Pololo and Manoa that were not in flood zones. So if you're not in a flood zone, pretty affordable, $600 to $800 a year. For peace of mind, it could be worth it for some families.
Yeah. That second rain was like, when you was in high school and you get the false crack. You dodged the first swing, but then you wasn't paying attention to the second one. And what happened was that the week before had all the rains and the storms, and we were all focused on that. But what happened is the second one came through. This is pure logic, folks. You don't need to be on scientists. But just imagine one sponge that is fully soaked. That was Oahu. And then you put more water. It's not going to absorb any more water, and it's going to run off. I went that Friday morning to the North Shore to pick up my niece who lives in Hauula. I lived here all my life. I never seen so much mud and debris on the road. I got through. And then just past Sunset Elementary School on the way to Kahuku direction, there was water. There was one new river going across Kamehameha Highway. It had three cars floating, and there was so much stuff going on, like had mokes on the road with shovels and stuff, and people were coming out, and because the emergency services, HPD, they was all overwhelmed. And so that's what happened in that second week. It all went down eventually, and everything is all opening up again.
And you were able to get your niece and get her to class.
Yeah, I got her to class.
It was like, what, a 6-hour journey for you
on
the roads.
It was longer than Gilligan's Island, 3 hours, but it was 6 hours. I left at 7 in the morning, and I got her back into Waikiki. And then it's like unusual places were flooding. Right in front, and the class was at the Hilton Hawaiian Village. It was like 1.5 feet. I seen all these tourists walking through the sidewalk. The water was up halfway to like their top of their calves in front of Hilton Hawaiian. So, and they had pumps running, and it was still like super high, but it was crazy. That's all. It was just, it got inundated. So why wait to something like this? It will happen again in the future. We live in a tropical environment.
Get the flood insurance.
Get the flood insurance.